I'll never forget the moment my stepfather, Richard, held up his new book in front of 200 guests and said, "If only my stepdaughter had read this 5 years ago, maybe she wouldn't be living paycheck to paycheck." The room erupted in polite laughter. My mother, Sandra, stood beside him in her emerald cocktail dress, nodding with that tight smile she always wore when she was embarrassed by me. My half-sister Victoria, golden-haired and perfect in her blush Valentino gown, covered her mouth to hide her smirk. I stood in the back corner of the hotel ballroom, wearing my navy Armani suit, holding a glass of champagne that suddenly felt too heavy in my hand. What Richard didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had just closed a deal that morning worth $2.4 million. What they didn't know was that my supposedly struggling lifestyle was actually a carefully curated decision to stay under their radar. Because sometimes the best revenge is letting people underestimate you until the perfect moment arrives. My name is Claire Morrison, and this is the story of how I went from being the family disappointment to teaching them the most expensive lesson of their lives. It started 12 years ago when my mother married Richard Ashford, a self-proclaimed financial guru who wrote mediocre books about wealth management and gave seminars to middle-aged men desperate to feel important. I was 16, angry about my parents' divorce, and completely uninterested in bonding with this man who collected vintage cars and wore too much cologne. Richard had a daughter, Victoria, who was 14 and already displayed the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. From day one, Richard made it clear that I was the problem child. "Claire has no ambition," he'd tell dinner guests while I sat right there at the mahogany table. "She's creative, which is code for unemployable." My mother would reach over and squeeze my hand under the table, but she never defended me, not once. Victoria, on the other hand, was golden. She followed Richard's advice religiously, majored in finance at Princeton, married a corporate lawyer named Brandon, and produced two perfect grandchildren. Every family gathering became a showcase of Victoria's achievements versus my apparent failures. What they saw was a 28-year-old woman who worked in consulting, lived in a modest apartment, drove a 6-year-old Honda, and never talked about money. What they didn't see was that I had built a tech consulting firm that specialized in cybersecurity for Fortune 500 companies. My team of 47 employees operated remotely. My modest apartment was actually a 3-bedroom penthouse in Tribeca that I owned outright, purchased under an LLC. The Honda was my choice because I'd rather spend money on experiences than impressing people at stoplights. I kept my success hidden for a simple reason. I wanted to see who would love me without the money, without the prestige. And the answer, painfully, was almost no one in my family. 3 months before Richard's book launch, things escalated at Victoria's baby shower. My mother had rented out a country club, decorated everything in white and gold, and invited 60 women who spent most of their time comparing engagement rings and discussing their husbands' promotions. I arrived with a gift I'd carefully chosen, a handcrafted wooden rocking chair from an artisan in Vermont, worth about $1,200. Victoria unwrapped it among the pile of designer baby clothes and expensive strollers, looked at it with barely concealed disappointment, and said, "Oh, how quaint, handmade. That's so you, Claire." My mother's friend, Patricia, leaned over and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Well, it's thoughtful given her budget." I smiled and sipped my mimosa, letting them think whatever they wanted. But then Richard showed up, because apparently baby showers aren't sacred anymore. He walked in wearing his tennis whites, fresh from the courts, and immediately found me. "Claire, can I talk to you for a moment?" He guided me to the outdoor terrace, away from the party. "Your mother is worried about you," he started, crossing his arms over his polo shirt. "You're almost 30, unmarried, no real career trajectory. Victoria mentioned you've been wearing the same 5 outfits for 2 years." I had been wearing the same rotation of clothes around them. In my real life, I had a closet full of designer pieces, but around them, I dressed down, way down. "I'm doing fine, Richard," I said calmly. "Fine isn't good enough. I've written 4 books about building wealth, and my own stepdaughter is a cautionary tale." He pulled out his phone. I'm sending you information about a financial literacy course. It's $497, but I can get you a family discount. You need to learn how money works, Claire. You need structure, discipline, investment strategies. I looked at this man who had a net worth of maybe $3 million, mostly from my mother's family inheritance, and was trying to teach me about money. The irony was delicious.
I'll think about it, I said. Don't think, do. That's your problem. You overthink everything and accomplish nothing. He patted my shoulder like I was a child and walked back inside. I stood on that terrace looking out at the manicured golf course and made a decision. I was done hiding. But what they didn't know was that the perfect opportunity for revelation was already in motion. Richard had been working on his 5th book, Wealth Mindset: How Elite Thinkers Build Empires, for 18 months. He'd secured a publisher, planned an elaborate launch party, and invited everyone he'd ever met. The event was scheduled for September 15th at the Grand Marriott downtown. He'd been talking about it nonstop, describing it as his legacy moment. I received my invitation in the mail, a heavy cream-colored card with embossed gold lettering. At the bottom, in smaller print, it said, "Business attire required. This is a professional networking event." That's when I knew. This would be the stage. The weeks leading up to the launch were filled with family dinners where Richard practiced his speech. "I'm going to talk about the difference between people who make money and people who make excuses," he'd say, looking directly at me across the dinner table. "It's all about mindset." My mother would nod enthusiastically. "You should really listen to this, Claire. Richard's book could change your life." Victoria, now visibly pregnant with her 3rd child, would add, "Brandon and I are buying 50 copies to give to his firm's partners. It's actually brilliant, Claire. You should read it." I'd smile and say nothing, mentally calculating my quarterly revenue projections. 2 weeks before the launch, something happened that made the upcoming reveal even sweeter. I received a call from Forbes magazine. They were finalizing their 30 under 40 list and wanted to confirm my company's revenue numbers and net worth before publication. The issue would hit newsstands on September 20th, just 5 days after Richard's book launch. "We have you listed at a personal net worth of $10.3 million and company revenues of $28 million annually," the journalist said. "Can you confirm these numbers?" I confirmed them, sitting in my home office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. "We're featuring you in the technology sector section. The photographer will contact you next week for the shoot." She paused. "Congratulations, Ms. Morrison. You're an inspiration." I hung up and looked at my reflection in the window. For years, I'd let my family believe I was struggling, purposeless, lost. In 5 days, at Richard's most important professional moment, that illusion would shatter. Little did my family realize that while Richard was preparing his speech about wealth building, I was preparing for something much bigger. The day of the book launch arrived with unseasonably warm September weather. I spent the morning on a board meeting for one of my clients, a pharmaceutical company where I was consulting on a $15 million cybersecurity overhaul. My assistant, James, had laid out my outfit for the evening, a custom-tailored Alexander McQueen suit in charcoal gray, Louboutin heels, and a Cartier watch I'd bought myself for my last birthday, worth $22,000. I looked at myself in the mirror before leaving. This was the real me, polished, powerful, completely in control. My family had never seen this version. At 6 p.m., I walked into the Grand Marriott ballroom. The space was decorated with modern minimalist elegance, tall white flowers, soft lighting, a stage with a podium. About 200 people milled around, mostly Richard's colleagues from his speaking circuit, some local business owners, and scattered family friends. My mother spotted me first. Her eyes widened slightly at my outfit, but she recovered quickly. "Claire, you're here. You look different. Is that suit new?" "Relatively," I said, kissing her cheek. Victoria appeared with Brandon, her lawyer husband, who had always treated me with polite condescension. "Wow, Claire, did you rent that suit for tonight?" Victoria asked, laughing. "It's gorgeous. What's the occasion?" Just thought I'd dress up, I replied. Richard emerged from a crowd of admirers, his face flushed with pre-speech excitement. He was wearing a custom navy suit with his book's cover design as a pocket square, which was incredibly tacky. He looked at me and frowned slightly. "Claire, you made it." He glanced at my outfit. "That's quite the getup. Trying to look the part even if you're not living it yet?" People around us cluckered. I smiled serenely. "Fake it till you make it, right?" I said sweetly. "Exactly. That's actually in Chapter 7. He clapped his hands together. "Well, I'm glad you're here. Maybe you'll actually learn something tonight." The program began with cocktails and networking. I positioned myself near the back, observing. My mother and Victoria worked the room together, introducing people to Richard, playing their roles as supporting family. Several people asked me what I did for a living. "I work in technology consulting," I'd say simply. "Oh, IT stuff?" they'd respond, already losing interest. "Something like that." At 7 p.m., everyone took their seats. Richard approached the podium, tapped the microphone, and launched into his speech. It was everything I expected: platitudes about hard work, anecdotes about his own success, thinly veiled criticisms of people who make excuses instead of money. 20 minutes in, he deviated from what I assumed was his prepared speech. "You know, I have to be honest about something personal tonight," he said, his voice taking on a serious tone. "I have a stepdaughter who represents everything I write about in this book, the cautionary tale, the person with potential who just can't seem to figure it out." My mother's face paled. Victoria looked uncomfortable. I sat completely still. "Claire is 28 years old," Richard continued. "Smart girl, went to a decent college, but she's been drifting for years. No real job, no savings that I know of, no plan. And I've tried to help her. I've offered her advice, sent her courses, tried to teach her basic financial literacy. But you can't help someone who won't help themselves." The room was silent. 200 people were now aware of my supposed failures. "So I want to dedicate Chapter 12, Breaking the Poverty Mindset, to Claire. Because if my book helps even one person like her wake up and take control of their financial future, then all of this will have been worth it." He held up the book. People applauded. My mother was crying softly. Victoria reached over and squeezed my hand in what I think she thought was sympathy. Richard continued his speech, talking about investment strategies and retirement planning. I sat there, my heart pounding, but not from embarrassment, from anticipation. When his speech ended, there was more applause. People rushed the stage to buy signed copies. Richard was in his element, shaking hands, taking photos, soaking up admiration. I waited 15 minutes, letting him enjoy his moment. Then I stood up and walked toward the stage. The phone call I received that day would change everything, except I'd already received it, and the change was about to unfold. "Richard," I said clearly, my voice cutting through the crowd noise, "can I say something?" He looked up from signing a book, surprised. "Claire? Sure. This is a book event, but if you want to say a few words." People turned to look at me. My mother stood up from her seat, confused. Victoria whispered something to Brandon. I stepped onto the small stage, not rushed, not emotional, just calm and purposeful. "I want to thank Richard for that dedication. Chapter 12, right? Breaking the Poverty Mindset." He nodded, smiling uncertainly. "That's right. It's interesting because I actually don't have a poverty mindset. In fact, I don't have anything close to poverty at all." I reached into my handbag and pulled out a folder I'd prepared. I've been keeping something from this family for a long time, mostly because I wanted to see who would support me without knowing. The answer was disappointing, but educational. The room was completely silent now. "Richard, you mentioned I have no real job. I own a cybersecurity consulting firm called Morrison Tech Solutions. We have 47 employees and generated $28 million in revenue last year. My personal net worth is $10.3 million. I opened the folder and pulled out a printed bank statement, my most recent one, with identifying information visible but account numbers redacted for security. I held it up. This is one of my business accounts. Current balance, $2.7 million. I also own my apartment in Tribeca outright, valued at $3.2 million. I have investment properties in Brooklyn and Austin worth a combined $1.8 million. I drive a Honda because I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I wear simple clothes around you because I wanted to see if you'd value me without the flash. My mother's hand was over her mouth. Victoria had gone completely white. Richard stood frozen, his pen still hovering over an open book. And Richard, about that financial literacy course you recommended, the $497 one. I actually looked at it. It's basic information that anyone could find free online. The investment strategies.
In your book, they're 15 years out of date. The chapter on real estate investing, it doesn't account for current market dynamics at all. I pulled out another document. This is a pre-release copy of Forbes magazine's 30 Under 40 issue. It comes out in 5 days. I'm featured on page 47. They interviewed me about building a tech company as a woman in a male-dominated field. They asked about overcoming obstacles. I told them about having a family that constantly underestimated me and how that became my greatest motivation. The room erupted, not in applause, in shocked murmuring. People pulled out phones, presumably to Google my company. Richard's face had gone from pale to red. So, Richard, I don't need your book. I don't need your advice. I don't need your financial literacy courses. What I needed was for my family to believe in me, to support me, to see me as I actually am instead of what they assumed. I turned to address the whole room. I'm sharing this publicly because Richard chose to humiliate me publicly. He dedicated a chapter of his book to my supposed failures in front of 200 people. I think that deserves a public correction. I stepped down from the stage and walked directly to my mother. She stood up, tears streaming down her face, and reached for me. I stepped back. Mom, you let him do that. You've let him belittle me for 12 years and never once defended me. Claire, I didn't know. I had no idea you were so successful, she stammered. That's the point. You should have believed in me regardless. You should have shut him down regardless of my bank account. I turned to Victoria, who looked like she might faint. Victoria, every time you compared your life to mine, every time you pitied me, I was closing deals worth more than Brandon's annual salary. I never needed your sympathy. Brandon was frantically typing on his phone, probably looking up my company. His eyes widened as he found it. I looked back at Richard one last time. He was standing on his little stage, his big moment completely destroyed, his book signing abandoned, as everyone in the room was now more interested in me than him. Enjoy your book launch, Richard. I hope it sells well. Though I have to tell you, that cover design is really unflattering. If you ever write a 6th book, I can recommend a graphic designer. She charges $15,000 for a project like this, but it would actually look professional. I walked out of the ballroom, my heels clicking on the marble floor, my head held high, leaving behind a room full of people frantically searching for me online and a family whose illusions about me had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces. But what happened next left them speechless. Well, more speechless than they already were. The next morning, I woke up to 147 missed calls and text messages. My mother had called 32 times, Victoria 18. Richard, surprisingly, hadn't called at all.
I ignored all of them, went for a run along the Hudson, showered, and made myself breakfast while looking at the New York skyline from my living room. At 10 a.m., my doorbell rang. I checked the camera. My mother stood there, alone, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I almost didn't open the door, but something in me, maybe the 16-year-old girl who used to need her mother's approval, turned the lock. "Claire," she said immediately, stepping inside. She looked around my apartment, taking in the original artwork, the custom furniture, the view. "This is where you live?" "For 4 years now." She sank onto my sofa, crying. "I've been a terrible mother." I sat across from her, not comforting her, just watching. "Yes, you have, at least when it comes to standing up for me. Richard said you were aimless, that you needed guidance, and I believed him because he seemed so sure, and Victoria was thriving, and you were always so quiet about your life, and I just assumed—" She trailed off. "You assumed the worst. You never asked me directly about my life. You never visited my apartment. You never showed genuine interest in what I was doing." I kept my voice level. "You chose your husband's narrative over your own daughter." "I know. I'm so sorry." She looked up at me with red eyes. "Can you forgive me?" "Eventually, maybe, but not today. Today, I'm still angry." She nodded, accepting this. "Is everything you said last night true? The money, the company, Forbes?" "Every word." "Why did you hide it?"
This was the question I'd been waiting for, because I wanted to know who would love me when they thought I had nothing, because I wanted to see if my family support was conditional. It was. That's a painful truth, but at least now I know. My mother stayed for an hour. We talked, carefully, about the years of small cuts, the 1,000 tiny moments when she chose Richard's opinion over defending me. She apologized repeatedly. I accepted the apologies, but made no promises about when our relationship would feel normal again. After she left, I blocked everyone's numbers except hers. I needed space. The Forbes issue came out 5 days later. I bought 10 copies, kept one, and had James deliver the others to various people. My mother received one with a note. "This is who I've been all along." Victoria received one with no note. Richard received one at his office with a sticky note that said, "Chapter suggestion for Book 6, How to Recognize Success When It's Standing Right in Front of You." The publicity from Forbes brought unexpected attention. Business inquiries tripled. I was invited to speak at 3 major tech conferences. A venture capital firm reached out about partnering on a new project. My life, already successful, leveled up again. I had been keeping a secret that was about to come out, and now that it was out, I felt lighter than I had in years. 3 months later, I hosted Thanksgiving at my apartment. I invited my mother, just her, not Richard, not Victoria. The boundaries were simple. We talk about real things, we're honest, we rebuild slowly. She arrived with flowers and sweet potatoes, her famous recipe, looking nervous. We cooked together, and for the first time in over a decade, we had a real conversation. She told me about feeling powerless in her marriage, about choosing financial security over standing up for me, about her regrets. "I'm going to marriage counseling," she said, while we set the table, "with or without Richard. I need to figure out who I became." I was proud of her for that. Victoria reached out in December through a mutual friend. She wanted to talk. I agreed to coffee, neutral territory. She showed up looking exhausted, her 3rd baby now 3 months old. "I was jealous of you," she admitted, stirring sugar into her latte. "You always seemed not to care what anyone thought. Even when Dad criticized you, you just took it. I thought you were weak, but you were actually strong. I've been performing my whole life for his approval." "And now?" I asked. "Now I'm tired, and I realized that the life I thought was perfect is actually just expensive and exhausting." She looked at me directly. I'm sorry, Claire, for every snide comment, every comparison, every time I made you feel less than. You didn't deserve any of it. This apology felt genuine. We talked for 2 hours. I didn't promise that we'd be close, but I left the door open. Richard never apologized. 6 months after his book launch, he and my mother separated. His book sold modestly, but never hit any bestseller lists. The publicity from the incident, as it became known in their social circle, wasn't the kind he wanted. He moved to Florida. I haven't spoken to him since that night at the Marriott, and I don't plan to. My company continued to grow. I hired 3 new senior consultants and expanded into AI security. My net worth crossed $15 million. I started a scholarship fund for young women studying computer science, specifically those from families who don't understand or support their ambitions. I learned that revenge isn't about making people suffer. It's about proving them wrong by succeeding so completely that their opinions stop mattering. It's about building a life so fulfilling that their approval stops mattering. Sometimes late at night, I think about that moment on stage when I revealed everything. I don't regret it. Richard made my struggles public, so I made my success public. Fair trade. I'm 30 now. Still unmarried, which my mother no longer comments on. Still driving my Honda, though I also bought a Tesla for longer trips. Still working in consulting, except now when I say that, people Google me first and treat me very differently. The best part isn't the money or the recognition. It's the peace. I sleep soundly knowing I built something real on my own terms. I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The people who matter know my worth. The people who don't aren't in my life. My stepfather called me financially illiterate at his book launch. He was wrong, but more importantly, I don't need him to admit it. His opinion, his book, his carefully constructed image of financial expertise, none of it touches me anymore. I'm on Forbes Under 40 with $10.3 million and growing. I did it quietly, without their support, despite their doubts. And that, more than any revenge, is the sweetest success of all.